Hello everybody, this is Aditya Aryan from Foundation of Democratic Reforms, and today we are sitting with Dr. JP to make sense of the American elections and the verdict and what seems like a comfortable victory for Donald John Trump and his second term as the American president. So, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Aditya.
Sir, the first question that I want to understand is, I just want to have an understanding of the American political landscape for the last 50 years. And the reason I invoke 50 years, because 74 was the Nixon resignation over the Watergate scandal. And here comes a president who has number of cases running against him, right? And number of cases against the president. So how do you see this landscape has changed over the course of 50 years?
It's a good question. As I said, in 1974, what Nixon did were very minor errors of judgment and minor infractions. By contemporary standards in America or the general standard in India, they were really irrelevant things. He only obstructed justice without his knowledge when somebody from his re-election committee organized a burglary of Democratic Party's National Convention office to unearth the secrets of their political strategies. That's all that happened. And these burglars, they bungled it and they got caught. And slowly it came to light that the president's re-election committee at some level was involved. The president was not involved. But after he got to know about it, he did not do the right thing, namely order very vigorous prosecution of these culprits. And he, in fact, tried to shield them out of a misplaced sense of loyalty. That's all the mistake he committed. He was forced to resign. His own party, grandees like, for instance, Barry Goldwater, he was an earlier presidential candidate. In some ways, he reshaped the Republican Party in the southern states by making it predominantly the white versus black kind of a thing. And even Barry Goldwater, he advised the president that, look, you would not get support in the Senate and you better quit. And he resigned finally. Compared to that, the number of charges Trump faced, the number of indiscretions that he committed, and twice he actually was impeached. Nixon was not impeached. The House did not even vote on his impeachment. There was a committee which was examining it. They did not even formally vote for impeachment. Whereas in case of Trump, twice the House impeached him and the Senate exonerated him. So no other president was impeached twice. In fact, only one other president was impeached, and that was Clinton. So given that, it appears from a democratic moral standpoint of view a little strange. What it means is that when passions are running high, when society is polarized, the individual conduct of a leader is much less relevant. My guy, whatever he does. Now, why has become their guy? I think that is important. American political landscape, I think in some ways has changed in the last 10, 20 years. And Trump is one of the first persons to understand that. Democratic Party always stood by the working class. They were not particularly in favor of global trade. They were somewhat isolationist. Whereas that party, since Bill Clinton's time, has changed character. It became a party of global trade, a party of international cooperation, a party of global alliances, NATO and others. The things normally associated with the Republican Party earlier. And two, because of the global trade and NAFTA agreement with Mexico and Canada, North American Free Trade Agreement, it's a fact that at least in the short term, American manufacturing suffered. And Democratic Party lost the working class. And Trump understood there's a large working class, particularly in the critical states, which are swing states, because in American politics, as you know, it's not really a national election. It is an election in each of the states. Even one vote majority, except in two small states, even one vote more than the other party, you sweep all the electoral college votes. And one vote less, you get zero. About 42, 43 states, they're settled Democrat or Republican. But key swing states, the Rust Belt, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, these are all manufacturing states traditionally, they suffered. The working class suffered. Trump understood that. He understood the power of this. Ohio, they lost earlier. That's also one of the important states with a lot of manufacturing. So state after state, they started losing. So there is the landscape has changed. There's a reshaping of the American social coalition. The second thing is, immigration certainly is creating a lot of insecurity and a lot of cultural and psychological insecurity. To be fair, I don't think there's any serious economic problem on account of that. While no country can allow illegal immigration, the fact is that a large number of these immigrants have been there for 15, 20, 25 years. They have children born in the United States. And most curiously, many people may or may not know this, the immigrants, the undocumented immigrants, as they call them, they are paying about $100 billion taxes annually without any benefit to them. Those taxes include also what are called payroll taxes, Social Security, unemployment insurance, Medicare. And they're not eligible to any of them because they don't have a Social Security card, they don't have citizenship, they're undocumented. But despite that, once you pay income tax, you're duty bound to pay all this. So they're paying $100 billion. And they probably constitute about 4.5% of the workforce in the United States. And many of the small jobs, if they don't hold them, if they don't perform them, there are probably no takers in the US. In the US are actually very low unemployment. So in a way, it may hurt the economy if you're reckless about it. Certainly, the illegal entrants, particularly in recent years, you must send them back. But wholesale is not possible. But nevertheless, the American people, in large parts, developed a certain degree of fear and animosity towards what they believe is the invasion from the South. And when you see on television sometimes, from some of the Latin American countries, people go in droves as if there's an invasion literally is taking place. Now, no nation state can accept people entering your country without any proper documentation or visa and then claiming the right. There, perhaps Democrats should have been much firmer in their language, though, to be fair, Democrats actually acted quite firmly. Barack Obama sent back many people. And Joe Biden has been pretty firm on the immigration issue. But Trump has been much stronger in the rhetoric and tapped into these primordial fears. And I think you could capture their imagination. That's the second big reason why he won. One is tariffs. He wanted to bring tariffs and then protect industry, the working class, etc. The second is this immigration issue. The third is the cultural issues, which are irrelevant for governance really. They have no bearing on public policy seriously. But cultural issues it tapped into. America, being a somewhat rootless country, takes relatively less significant issues into major mega issues. Gun rights, absolute freedom of speech, then abortion or no abortion, right to life versus right to abortion. So instead of coming to a reconciliation of conflicting interests, there's a propensity to polarize society and take it as an all or none war. And Trump tapped into that, these cultural things, evangelicals and others, etc. So in many ways, he has reshaped the American political landscape. I think that's the primary reason why he has succeeded.
So, you have already touched upon the next question. Because in a system like America, a voter has to make certain trade-offs, right? You're supposed to get something from a party. Are you willing to trade off that for something else from the other party, right? So I wanted to understand the intent of the American voter this time. Climate and healthcare seems to be a well enough trade-off for them, for that matter. RFK Jr. saying that there should be no vaccines, right? Or abortion rights for that matter, or them openly denying climate change. So how do you see this trade-off in terms of the industrial policy for that matter, which they are?
If you look at things dispassionately and logically, you're right. Gun control. Common sense tells us that common sense regulation is required to protect ourselves. Similarly, healthcare. Again, common sense tells us that if everybody is not covered by some form of insurance, every illness becomes a catastrophic event in the life of the family. And many Americans, including well-to-do Americans and including doctors, are terrified of ill health, insurance problems and all that, and out-of-pocket expenditure, etc. Similarly, if housing is a problem, no, certainly some assistance from the government, etc. So, there are many issues where perhaps American society is valuing them less than the other issues which are evoking primordial loyalties. And I think the immediate pocketbook issue, American economy right now is extremely strong. It's another strange behavior. Normally, in developed countries where there's mature polity, the axiom is that if the government is able to generate good economic growth, if unemployment is low, if inflation is under control, that government will be re-elected. That's the norm.
Yes.
Right now, all three are true. There is very little unemployment. It's less than 4%. There is very low inflation, though there was inflation after COVID in every country, including America. Now it's under 3%. And the economy is growing at 3%, which is the highest rate among all the G7 countries and all the OECD countries. And yet, the fact that because of COVID stimulus, the prices have risen, and therefore at the gas station compared to what the prices were 4 or 5 years ago, the price is now higher. Or at the grocery store, the price you pay is higher. That has become the central issue in this election. And once you are agitated by one central issue or two central issues, immigration and the price rise, everything else seems to have fallen apart. Perhaps people also believe that Trump's bark is worse than the bite. Therefore, he may say something, his style may be that, but ultimately when it comes to policy, he'll be moderate as I think the expectation. For instance, abortion. It was Trump's induction of 3 new judges in the Supreme Court that led to abortion, practically, the Roe versus Wade being overturned. But Trump is perceived to be a person who is somewhat soft on this. Well, he was the cause of the problem to please the evangelists. He also doesn't care much about it. He doesn't want a very tough regulation. So I believe people believe that in these areas, what he says is different from what he would actually do. So they were somewhat less afraid. So Trump is a very complex character. There's no overwhelming principle involved in his decision-making or thinking, except maybe economic growth of America and business prospects of Americans, and America's greatness in the way he understands. Otherwise, he has no other adherence to any philosophy or any doctrine. Almost anything that works, he's willing to do it. I think people sensed that probably in these areas which are very important, ultimately Trump, despite what he's saying, he will actually do the right thing, is probably their expectation.
So, as you talked about appointing Supreme Court judges, there are a number of investigations against Trump. How do you then see the institutional accountability? How do you see the investigations going ahead? And
certainly, in the last few years, if there's anything that has significantly taken a hit, it is rule of law. America is a country of laws and rule of law. Whatever be its failings, nobody can dispute American system of rule of law by and large. But now it appears that if you are powerful, if you enjoy the public support, you cannot be touched. And in a way, the people sanctified it by this verdict. So certainly, in the short and medium term, American rule of law is going to take a hit. Whether the country can recover or there's a decline in the perception of rule of law in America, only the future can tell. But I think it's undeniable that American rule of law has suffered.
So now I'll try to paint a global picture. The first presidency of Donald Trump, we did not have the extent of escalation that we have now in Israel and Palestine issue. We did not have the Russia-Ukraine. Right now, the world seems a little more divisive, right? As the American population themselves are much more, sort of antagonized towards immigrants. How do you see Trump coming in a global order, which is vastly different from how it was even 4 years ago?
In one area, I think it's somewhat predictable. It's almost certain that he will force Ukraine to bargain for peace against its own perception of self-interest. So a little more favorable to Russia than to Ukraine. It's also possible because he respects Putin in a public way. Putin will feel he can grant a few concessions without losing face. That's also possible. You never know how it works. So that depends on the way the Trump's team will handle. But almost certainly, Ukraine probably cannot continue this war now. And because they can't simply surrender, there has to be an acceptance of some kind of a peace treaty and probably a somewhat adverse to Ukraine. That is, I think, a reasonable expectation right now. How adverse, we'll have to wait and see how the foreign policy team negotiates and what kind of a team is appointed, etc. Israel is a slightly different case. For political reasons, Trump's support, maybe even for cultural reasons, Trump's support for Israel has been unwavering. In the last term, for instance, he did many things unilaterally. He accepted East Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which could have been a part of the negotiation of the two-state solution. But he sort of agreed. And that's a big plus for Israel. Therefore, there's no incentive to now grant concessions about the two-state solution. He accepted Golan Heights as a part of Israel. Golan Heights in 1967 was occupied by Israel. The war was imposed on Israel, and Israel won that war in 6 days dramatically. And because of security reasons, Israel is still continuing to control that. He sort of accepted Israeli territory. He also accepted the settlements in the West Bank, particularly, whereas others were looking at some kind of a feasible solution. But most of all, he did something very creative and constructive from Israel's point of view, and maybe Middle East point of view. He brokered peace and treaties between Israel and some of the Middle Eastern Arab countries, United Arab Emirates and Jordan, other countries. And even Saudi Arabia, he came quite close to achieving that. So his interest in Israel's security and support for them seems to be steadfast. Now that there is a particular situation where Iran has propped up all these militia groups and terrorist agencies, and now that Israel seems to have an upper hand, at least for the time being, against Hamas, against Hezbollah, and Houthis also, because even America is very angry, even we are angry because shipping lanes they are trying to disrupt. All these are now on the back foot. Trump's intervention may escalate the situation with Iran. May, we don't know for sure. At the same time, Trump is a complex character. He has aversion to war. He's fundamentally anti-war, fundamentally an isolationist. So which will prevail? His anti-war sentiment, because his primary goal appears to be to further the economic interests of the United States. Now, if the oil prices shoot up because of the escalation of the war in respect of Iran, and if Iran does something like, mining the whole Persian Gulf, Arabian Gulf, and if that is the case, about 20 million barrels plus per day, oil supply will be affected globally. And that's catastrophic. The prices will rise. And Trump is very sensitive to public opinion in the United States. So that may actually restrain him. But if things go out of control, the natural impulse to support Israel and to punish Iran, that may dominate. What will dominate depends on the context. We don't know. But both impulses, it's not one-sided impulse. He's not one of those rabble-rousers who simply go for a war. He would also think of other implications.
So, the popular imagination of Donald Trump is he's very instinctive, right? So impulsive. More than instinctive, impulsive. So in global order, and especially because the tensions have been high, you need some predictability for that matter. You expect the president or the team of the president of the United States to know where they're heading in terms of policy. How do you, not just Israel, Palestine, not just Ukraine and Russia, how do you see global order shifting? Because you don't know what the president is going to do.
You're absolutely right. That probably is the biggest fear of much of the world. NATO alliance is supposed to be the bedrock of American foreign and security policy. Now, he does not seem to really care much for NATO alliance. He is very disdainful, very publicly condemning it and saying it's irrelevant and things like that. That's why Europe is deeply worried. Western Europe is deeply, deeply worried. He doesn't seem to accept the traditional doctrines of great power play and America's role in that play, whether it's dealing with Russia or some other country, except in terms of trade and economic management. He does not seem to have any other consideration. And the promises made explicit or implied, like, Taiwan will not be unilaterally occupied by China, while America and the rest of the world accepts that Taiwan is a Chinese territory. You cannot simply unilaterally occupy. Is a now standard thing. But nobody is sure that he will actually commit himself to that. Or the security coverage given to Japan, the explicit security coverage. Therefore, Japan did not go for nuclear weapons. He was actually asking them to have nuclear weapons instead of asking for American security. So there is a certain method in the madness. First of all, everything he looks from the economic prism, from his country's self-interest point of view. Second, he is generally averse to a war. But sometimes being well prepared is the best way to defend yourself from or to prevent a war rather than being ill prepared. So we don't know how that's going to shape up, because last time he had a fairly competent foreign policy team. This time I think he lost quite a few of them. Most of the senior people who advised him and who acted as some kind of lightning rods or the checks on his decision making, they're all antagonized now. They all left him in disgust, they opposed him. So one of the great fears that many in the American establishment worry about is, are there adults in the room? If everybody is merely a toady who will follow orders, will the impulsive nature of the president lead to precipitate decisions on occasion which are detrimental to either global peace or American interests themselves? That's $1 million question. We have to wait and see whether the Republican Party can sit with him and then see that at least some wise heads are there whom the president can trust and yet who can act as a restraining influence on him. We do not know.
So now let's try and understand the Democrats this time around. I'll just put one question for them. How do you think the Republicans, Trump for that matter, managed to make inroads with one of the most loyal supporters for Democrats, be it the migrants? The migrants have been openly saying that we will vote Trump, legally, who have been there for 30, 40 years, right? Black people, Latinos, Hispanic, every of these communities who were regarded as being an ally for the Democratic Party has somehow shifted. How do you see this?
That's why I think that the shift in the nature of American society, Trump understood better than the Democrats. For instance, take the question of immigrants. Our intuitive thinking would be like, if I am an immigrant, I would support all immigrants. I think Trump somehow made them understand there's a clear distinction between legal immigrant and undocumented illegal immigrant. These are two different issues. I think they understood it. Otherwise, there's no reason why they would vote for that. And second, most of the immigrants also, they're culturally somewhat conservative. You take most of the Latin American immigrants, they're all Catholic, conservative, family values and things like that. So I think he appealed to that part of it. What is particularly surprising is the American black males. He seems to have got a significant vote from the American black males. It looks like Trump has got the highest vote share of black population of America after Nixon. In about 50 years, nobody got a greater share from Republican Party, which is an amazing feat. Nobody expected that. So that means he understood something more than the traditional divides in society. The economic pain and the ambition and aspiration and the angst of the people. And somewhere I think he could touch a chord and people responded to that.
So do you think it's the short-term economic promises that Trump is making? Because the working class that we're talking about, they sort of overlap with this community as well, right? Primarily, they belong to a community that has been oppressed for a long time. And Trump is seemingly speaking their language, right? Do you think there is an overlap between that and the economic promise that Trump is giving them?
To some extent, but actually they may come to rue that, because if you really impose 60% tariffs on China and 20% on the rest of the world, many distinguished economists say it will actually undermine the American economy dramatically. American economy, instead of growing, will actually will start decelerating. Similarly, if 12 million illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants are all forcibly thrown out of the country, forget the logistics and social strife, purely economically, they constitute 4.5% of the workforce in the country. They pay $100 billion of taxes. They're taking up jobs which are somewhat unattractive for the American population. So it's possible that there'll be tremendous economic disruption. Once that happens, maybe some of the promises, however well-intentioned they are, people may realize that we are worse off than this. But until that happens, because it tapped into the reservoir of angst there, until you pay the price for some of these policies which look attractive, but if they're actually implemented the way they were articulated, they could do considerable damage. Until that time, I think people will not get wiser.
So essentially my last question, bringing this back to India, How do you see, because we talked about global order as well, we've talked about his immigration policy, we know how protectionist Trump is in terms of economies, buy American,
He's
America
almost
first.
mercantilist, absolutely.
Yeah, buy American, America first. How do you see both global order and economically India placed in this presidency of Trump?
See, India will have no difficulty in terms of geopolitical situation because both parties are very friendly and they have the same attitude to India. Irrespective of personalities, India is well placed in that sense in dealing with the United States. Maybe with Trump, there may be a little more of leeway in dealing with terrorism, etc., because he gives importance to controlling terror than some normative values, etc. But trade-wise, if indeed Trump imposes 20% tariff, it could hurt us in two ways. One, United States is one of the few countries with whom we have trade surplus.
Yes.
The moment you impose tariffs, it's common sense that our exports will fall, and our trade surplus will be lost. And without having access to American markets, no serious country can expect significant economic growth. And that certainly is an engine for economic growth. But there's another reason. With tariffs, it's not merely that our exports will fall. Many economists say that about 7% of the GDP globally will be affected. Now, India is at a growing phase. Among the large economies, we are one of the fastest growing in the world. An economy growing well, what does it want? Stability.
Correct.
Access to trade. And overall global growth so that the demand for goods and services continues to rise so that we can meet them with our production of goods and services. What is growth? Growth is creation of goods and services. That's what GDP is, that's growing. And if there's no demand because of somebody's policies somewhere else, global recession is there, we'll be hurt. So in that sense, indirectly also, India may be hurt more than other countries. Trade-wise, we may be hurt just like any other country. But the consequences of global recession on account of these policies, if it does happen as many economists argue, then India may be more hurt than others because we are at a reasonably high growth phase. But then we have stakes in what America does, but we have no say in what it does. We'll have to see. Probably it will be moderated because there are enough of wise heads in the United States. And with experience, they'll realize that it will not work, but we'll have to wait and see what will happen.
Sir, and on the geopolitical front, what's your view? Because of what's happening with India and Canada, and FBI also has had some issues, but dealt diplomatically pretty well with India. How do you see geopolitically India being placed?
No, and these matters, as I said, Trump acts more from controlling terrorism point of view and national interest rather than normative approach. The Canadian government, to put it very mildly, has taken a very normative approach when it comes to relationship between two major countries. You cannot apply the same yardstick to nation states as you apply to individuals. United States went into Pakistan and Abbottabad. They decimated Osama bin Laden. Pakistan made some pro forma protests. But the underlying principle is that extreme acts of terror, your national interest is more important than sovereignty of some other nation. And even more significantly in case of Canada, I think the Canadian government has completely misread the situation in Canada itself. As a very senior political figure from the Sikh community in Canada, a former Prime Minister or Premier of British Columbia, he said, 95% of the Sikhs in Canada do not want to break up India. They don't want to support Khalistan. Only 5% maverick elements want it. Now, by making it appear that all Sikhs in Canada are in favor of breaking up India, he's not doing any service to the Canadian Sikhs also, apart from hurting Indian sentiment as well as Indian security. So it's a bit of a mess that Canadian government has landed itself and perhaps India also in it. Trump will not tolerate such things. He will not support such things. I think once he understands it's about terrorism and it's about nations being broken up, I think he will probably be less receptive to those areas than, say, the current United States administration.
Thank you, everybody. This was me with Dr. GP trying to understand and make sense of the new Trump presidency as it is imminent.